Imagine this, a warm spring morning in March 2025. Bookstores across America are opening their doors earlier than usual. A crowd is already waiting outside, some people holding old, worn copies of The Hunger Games, others dressed in fan cosplay. There's a buzz in the air, like the premiere of a blockbuster movie. But this isn't a movie. It's the release of Suzanne Collins's brand new novel, Sunrise on the Reaping. Within hours, social media explodes. TikTok is flooded with reaction videos, fans crying, laughing, screaming. Bookstores sell out their first shipments. Amazon pushes the book to the very top of its charts. By the end of the week, the novel has sold over 1 million copies, a number so staggering it reminds us of the original Hunger Games mania back in 2008. But here's the real twist. This isn't just a nostalgic prequel. Collins hasn't written a feel-good reunion with Katniss or Peeta. Instead, she's taken us back to one of the darkest chapters in Panem's history, the 50th Hunger Games, also known as the Second Quarter Quell. Now, let's pause for a moment. If you've read the original trilogy, you'll remember this event. It's the games that forced each district to send 2 boys and 2 girls instead of 1. It's the games where Haymitch Abernathy, the future mentor of Katniss Everdeen, emerged as victor. And it's the games that scarred him so deeply he drowned himself in alcohol just to keep living. This choice to return not to Katniss, not to Snow, but to Haymitch's origin story is fascinating. Why? Because Haymitch was always there in the background, sarcastic, broken, bitter. But he was also the survivor, a man who knew how the Capitol played its games and who carried the trauma of that knowledge in every scene. So here's the big question. Why tell this story now? Why in 2025, when America is facing unprecedented political polarization, economic inequality, and cultural division, did Collins choose to bring us back to the Quarter Quell? Let's dig deeper. Suzanne Collins didn't just wake up one day and think, "I'll add another chapter to Panem." No, in multiple interviews, she's explained her inspiration. One key influence, the 18th century philosopher David Hume. Yes, philosophy. Specifically, Hume's theory of implicit submission, the idea that governments don't rule by force alone. They rule because people accept their authority. Because fear, ritual, and habit keep societies obedient even when they're being crushed. Sound familiar? It should. In Panem, the districts don't fight back every year. They send their children willingly, ritualistically, because they can't imagine any other way. They accept the Capitol's rules, no matter how horrific. And if we're being honest, this idea hits uncomfortably close to home. Think about it. In America today, how often do we accept things we know are broken? From political corruption to media manipulation to the growing gap between rich and poor, we complain, but do we resist? Or do we, like the districts, keep sending our tributes year after year? This is why Sunrise on the Reaping has struck such a nerve. It's not just another Hunger Games book. It's a mirror. A story about Panem that's really about us. But before we go further, let's set the stage. Suzanne Collins has always been a master at timing. The Hunger Games in 2008 arrived at the peak of reality TV obsession, right when shows like Survivor and American Idol ruled the airwaves. Katniss's story wasn't just dystopia. It was a critique of a culture that turned suffering into entertainment. Then, in 2020, Collins gave us The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, diving into the young Coriolanus snow. That book came out in the middle of a global pandemic when the world was questioning leadership, morality, and survival. Again, perfect timing. Now, in 2025, we get Sunrise on the Reaping, and the timing is, once again, eerily perfect. America is more divided than ever. Conspiracy theories spread faster than facts. Social media feels like its own kind of Hunger Games arena. And Collins is here to ask what happens when a society not only tolerates cruelty, but depends on it.
And so, this video will not just retell the plot. You can read the book for that. What we're going to do here is deeper and more exciting. We'll explore how critics and scholars are already interpreting the novel. We'll break down its central themes: propaganda, trauma, inequality, and resistance. We'll compare it to the original trilogy and to Songbirds and Snakes. And most importantly, we'll ask what it says about America right now. Because, let's be honest, Collins isn't writing just about Panem. So grab your bow and arrows, your Mockingjay pin, or maybe just your favorite cup of coffee. Because for the next half hour, we're diving headfirst into Sunrise on the Reaping. And trust me, this is one story you'll want to stick around for.
All right, so let's talk story, because one of the biggest questions fans had before this book came out was simple. What actually happens in the 50th Hunger Games? If you've read the original trilogy, you already know the headline: Hamish Abernathy survives. But what Collins gives us in Sunrise on the Reaping isn't just a recap. It's a full, immersive descent into the bloodiest games Panem has ever seen. The beginning, return to Area 12. The novel opens not in the capital, not in the arena, but back in District 12. This choice is deliberate. Collins wants us to see Hamish not as a mentor, not as a broken drunk, but as a kid. A teenager with a sharp wit, a defined streak, and, surprisingly, hope. Life in District 12 is bleak, yes. Coal dust, hunger, poverty. But Hamish isn't crushed yet. He still has dreams. He still cracks jokes. He still has people he cares about. And that's what makes The Reaping so brutal. When the quarter-quell twist is revealed, 2 boys, 2 girls from each district, you can practically hear the air leave the crowd. Suddenly, Hamish is chosen. And just like that, the rest of his life is rewritten. Road to the capital. From here, Collins gives us all the ritual we remember. The train ride, the luxury meals, the stylists, the interviews. But this time it feels heavier. Because Hamish isn't Katniss. He's not trying to be a symbol. He's just trying to survive. One detail critics have praised is how Collins uses the capital's pageantry as both dazzling and horrifying. The food is decadent, the clothes are stunning, the technology is jaw-dropping, and yet every reader knows it's all a mask. Beneath the glitter, this is a machine built to chew children alive. Inside the ring, bloodier dames. Then comes the arena, and wow, Collins does not hold back. The 50th Hunger Games is bigger, deadlier, and designed to maximize suffering. Twice as many tributes means twice as much bloodshed. And unlike Katniss's forest arena, which felt like a survival test, Hamish's arena feels like a slaughterhouse. Here's where Collins' writing style really shines. Critics from The Guardian and Stanford Daily both pointed out how cinematic the violence feels, but also how psychological it is. It's not just kids fighting with weapons. It's fear, it's paranoia, it's betrayal. And it's the capital controlling the narrative every step of the way. Hamish, the broken hero. Now let's focus on Hamish himself. We've always known him as sarcastic, drunk, bitter, but in this book we see the layers peel back. His strategy in the arena isn't brute strength, it's cleverness, trickery, reading people. He outsmarts rather than outfights. One of the most haunting aspects is how Collins shows his victories come at impossible costs. Every alliance he makes, it ends in death. Every clever trick he uses, it leaves scars. And when he finally emerges as victor, the word victory feels almost sarcastic. Critics have compared this to PTSD narratives. Haymitch doesn't win, he survives. And survival becomes its own kind of curse. Narrative style, darker than before. Let's step back and look at style. Collins has always written in clear, direct prose, but in Sunrise on the Reaping, her tone shifts. It's darker, heavier, almost gothic. Where The Hunger Games was fast-paced and action-driven, and Songbirds and Snakes leaned into political intrigue, this book leans into trauma. Descriptions linger longer, the atmosphere is suffocating, and even the silences between characters feel loaded with dread. One reviewer called it Collins' most horror-like book yet. And honestly, that's not wrong. The arena reads less like a sports event and more like a haunted house where the ghosts are still alive. Very different from Katniss. Another key difference. Katniss' story was about defiance, about refusing to play by the Capitol's rules. Haymitch's story, yet, it's about what happens when you have no choice. This shift matters because it makes the book less about hope and more about fear, less about rebellion and more about submission. And that's exactly what Collins wanted, to show the mechanics of power before symbols like the Mockingjay could exist. The end, the beginning of the curse. Without spoiling the final chapters, let's just say Haymitch wins, but victory feels hollow. Collins doesn't end on celebration. She ends on emptiness, on a young man who will never be whole again. And when you think about the trilogy, it all makes sense. Suddenly, the drunk mentor who threw Katniss a piece of bread, who cracked cynical jokes, who seemed broken beyond repair, he's not just comic relief. He's the ghost of Panem's cruelty, standing right there beside our heroine. Why is this important? So why is this important? Because it proves Collins isn't just cashing in on nostalgia. She's expanding her universe in a way that deepens it. She's not writing fan service. She's writing tragedy. And tragedy,
as we all know, sticks with us longer than victory.
Let's move beyond the plot and dig into what makes Sunrise on the Reaping so fascinating, its themes. Because if The Hunger Games was a story about rebellion and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was about the birth of tyranny, then this book is about power, how it works, how it sustains itself, and how ordinary people get trapped inside it.
Advertising and media. The Capitol as reality TV. One of the strongest threads critics have noticed is the way Collins doubles down on media manipulation. Remember, The Hunger Games aren't just about killing, they're about performing. Every tribute is dressed, interviewed, staged. Every alliance is edited for maximum drama. Every death is turned into spectacle. In Sunrise on the Reaping, this machinery feels even more sinister. Why? Because with twice the tributes, the Capitol has twice the opportunities to craft storylines. They don't just show violence, they produce narratives. Heroes, villains, tragedies, love stories. It's reality TV on steroids, and it's impossible not to think of our own culture. Think about it. Every day we consume curated, edited, manipulated content, from Instagram highlight reels to 24-hour news cycles. We're not just watching reality, we're watching someone's version of reality. And that's exactly Collins' point. The Capitol doesn't have to hide the truth, they just have to shape it. Philosophy, David Hume and voluntary submission. Let's get a little philosophical. Suzanne Collins has said that a big inspiration for this novel was the Scottish philosopher David Hume. In the 1700s, Hume asked a question that still feels radical today. Why do so many people obey so few rulers? Think about it. The government, the military, the police, they're always outnumbered by the public. And yet, societies don't rise up every day. Why? Hume's answer is because people accept it. They consent, often silently. They internalize the rituals of power, the flags, the ceremonies, the traditions, and they believe resistance is impossible. Now, look back at Panem. Every year, the districts send their children. They watch them die. They weep, they rage, but they comply. That's implicit submission. And that's why the quarter quell is so terrifying. It's not just the capital flexing its power. It's millions of citizens proving human right, showing up, obeying, submitting to a system designed to break them. Power and fear. How does an empire survive? Another theme running through Sunrise on the Reaping is how fear itself becomes a political tool. The capital doesn't want hope, not yet, until Katniss. What it wants is obedience, and fear is the simplest, fastest way to get it. But here's where Collins is clever. Fear in this novel isn't just physical, it's psychological. It's the fear of standing out, the fear of questioning tradition, the fear of imagining another way of life. This is why Haymitch's cleverness is so subversive. He doesn't win because he's the strongest. He wins because he questions the script. He bends the capital's own rules against them. And in doing so, he shows us that power isn't absolute. It's fragile, dependent on the illusion that people won't resist. Reflection on contemporary America. Now, let's step out of Panem for a second, because one reason Sunrise on the Reaping is hitting so hard with American readers is that it doesn't feel entirely fictional. Media manipulation? We live in an age of fake news, deepfakes, viral propaganda, and influencers selling narratives. Implicit submission? Look around. Economic systems, political polarization, endless culture wars, and yet most people don't imagine real alternatives. Fear as control? From terrorism alerts to culture panic to social media outrage, fear is everywhere in American discourse. Collins isn't just writing dystopia, she's holding up a mirror, and that's why so many readers are calling this book uncomfortably relevant. Art as a warning, Collins's message. So what's the takeaway? Collins isn't saying we're doomed. She's not predicting America will literally become Panem, but she is warning us. Warning that power doesn't always look like soldiers with guns. Sometimes it looks like a TV broadcast. Sometimes it looks like a tradition nobody questions. Sometimes it looks like silence. And in that sense, Sunrise on the Reaping might be Collins' most political book yet. It's not just entertainment, it's a wake-up call. Move to the next chapter. So far, we've looked at how the book portrays propaganda, philosophy, and power. But there's one element we haven't unpacked yet: the human cost. Because beyond politics and philosophy, this is also a story of trauma, of how violence shapes the mind, how survival breaks the spirit, and how one teenager named Haymitch becomes a symbol of everything the capital tries to hide. That's where we're headed next.
Haymitch from survivor to witness to trauma. Let's shift the spotlight onto one character, the heart of Sunrise on the Reaping, Haymitch Abernathy. Because if this book is about anything, it's about showing us the boy behind the bitter, drunken mentor we thought we knew. And once you see that boy, you'll never read the original trilogy the same way again. Haymitch before the fall. When we meet Haymitch in Sunrise on the Reaping, he's not the sloppy, sarcastic man Katniss meets decades later. He's young, he's sharp, he's got charisma. In District 12, where hope is scarce, Haymitch somehow still has a spark. Collins paints him as quick-witted, with a streak of defiance. He's the kind of kid who notices the absurdity in the system and cracks a joke about it, even when everyone else is too beaten down to laugh. That humor, it's not just personality, it's survival. And that's what makes his descent into the games so heartbreaking. Shock in the arena. Once the Reaping happens and Haymitch enters the capital's world of spectacle, we start to see the cracks. He knows he's a pawn in a system designed to chew him up, but unlike some tributes, he doesn't believe in the story the capital is selling. In the arena, his strategies show brilliance, tricking opponents, turning the capital's own designs against them, thinking outside the script. But every clever move comes at a cost. He makes alliances and watches allies die. He outsmarts enemies and carries their deaths like weights on his conscience. Survival isn't clean. It's bloody, it's ugly, it's traumatic, and Collins doesn't let us look away. The torn survivor. Here's the irony. Haymitch wins the games. But in Collins' world, winning is another word for being broken in a way you'll never recover from. When he emerges as a victor, he's alive, but shattered. The Capitol crowns him, celebrates him, parades him. But behind that ceremony, he's just another ghost walking. Critics have pointed out the clear parallels to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Much like U.S. veterans returning from Iraq or Afghanistan struggling with PTSD. Think about survivors of school shootings carrying invisible scars. Think about anyone who has lived through violence, abuse, or systemic oppression trying to find ways to keep going. Haymitch represents all of them. He's not heroic in the traditional sense. He's not noble or flawless or inspirational. He's messy, he's damaged, and that's precisely what makes him real. From victim to witness. One of the most powerful things about Sunrise on the Reaping is how it transforms Haymitch from a side character into a kind of witness. In the original books, Katniss calls him unreliable, frustrating, often infuriating. But now we understand. He's not just a mentor, he's a warning. He embodies what the games really do to people. In fact, you could argue that without Haymitch's backstory, Katniss's rebellion would feel incomplete. His very existence is proof that the Capitol doesn't just kill children in the arena. It kills futures. It kills innocence. It leaves survivors who aren't really alive. Collins' artistic risk. And this was a risky move for Suzanne Collins as a writer. Expanding a beloved universe by focusing on a broken, tragic figure could have backfired. Fans could have rejected it as too depressing or unnecessary. But instead, many critics are praising it as her boldest choice yet. Because by humanizing Haymitch, she deepens the entire saga. The Hunger Games aren't just Katniss's story anymore. They're Panem's story. And Haymitch is the bridge, the connective tissue between eras of suffering. Move to the next chapter.
So what do we take away? That Sunrise on the Reaping isn't just about how the games work. It's about what they leave behind. And Haymitch Abernathy is the perfect lens, the boy who outsmarted the Capitol but could never escape it. Up next, we'll zoom out even further to look at the aesthetic of this novel, the gothic darkness, the horror-like atmosphere, and why critics say this is Collins' most unsettling book yet.
Horror and gothic atmosphere in Sunrise on the Reaping. When readers picked up Sunrise on the Reaping, many expected suspense, action, maybe political drama. What they didn't expect was horror. But that's exactly what Collins delivers, and it's one of the reasons this book has left readers calling it her darkest work yet. Horror in children's games. Let's start with the obvious. The Hunger Games have always been horrific. Kids killing kids is disturbing no matter how you frame it. But in the earlier trilogy, much of that horror was filtered through Katniss's perspective. She was tough, focused, sometimes detached. Here, though, Collins strips away the filters. Through Haymitch's eyes, the games aren't just cruel, they're grotesque. She lingers on details, the smell of blood in the arena, the way the Capitol stylizes violence as entertainment, the eerie silence after a cannon fires. One critic described it as reading Lord of the Flies directed by Guillermo del Toro. And that feels right. It's still YA fiction, yes, but the emotional intensity pushes it into psychological horror. Gothic narrative style. Now let's talk about style. Scholars have pointed out that Collins borrows from Gothic tradition in this book. You know the tropes: haunted spaces, looming dread, a sense that evil isn't just outside, it's inside the system, baked into the world. In Sunrise on the Reaping, the arena itself becomes almost a Gothic castle. Every corner hides danger, every shadow whispers death. Nature isn't a refuge, it's weaponized. Even the Capitol, with its gleaming lights and grand architecture, feels uncanny. Beneath the glitter, there's rot. Beneath the celebrations, there's blood. That's classic Gothic. Beauty masking horror. Psychological horror. But what really elevates the horror here isn't gore, it's psychology. Haymitch isn't just fighting opponents, he's fighting paranoia, dread, and the constant awareness that survival may be worse than death. His thoughts circle darker and darker like a spiral he can't escape. Collins taps into the horror of inevitability. Readers know he'll win. The trilogy already told us, but the question becomes, what will he lose along the way? That inevitability is terrifying because we're watching a slow-motion psychological collapse. It's dread, not shock, that makes the novel so unsettling. Why now? A reflection on the American reader. So why would Collins lean into horror in 2024? The answer might lie in what American readers themselves are living through. A world of pandemics, climate disasters, political unrest. Fear has become ambient. Entertainment itself has turned darker, from prestige TV like The Last of Us to horror films dominating the box office. Young readers especially are drawn to fiction that doesn't sugarcoat reality, but reflects the anxieties they already feel. In that sense, Collins is tapping into the cultural moment. She's not inventing the darkness, she's naming it. Reader under the microscope. Another thing scholars have noted, horror here doesn't just affect the characters, it affects us, the audience. Think about it. As we read the book, we become complicit. We turn pages, craving suspense, consuming the spectacle of death. That discomfort is intentional. Collins wants us to feel like capital citizens, entertained by suffering. It's meta-horror. The monster isn't just the capital. The monster is us too, for watching. Collins as horror writer. This raises a fascinating question. Is Suzanne Collins a horror writer now? She's always been dystopian, always been political, but in Sunrise on the Reaping, she flirts with the language of horror, atmosphere, dread, the grotesque. Some critics even compare her to Stephen King, not in style, but in the way she forces readers to confront fears they'd rather avoid. And maybe that's why this book feels so fresh. It's not just a return to Panem, it's an expansion of genre. Collins is saying, The Hunger Games was never just action. It was always horror. You just weren't ready to see it. Move on to the next chapter. So here's where we stand. Sunrise on the Reaping is a horror story disguised as YA dystopia. It unsettles, it disturbs, and it makes readers question their own role as consumers of violence. But we're not done yet, because the last piece of the puzzle is reception. How are critics, scholars, and most importantly, fans reacting to this novel, and what does that tell us about the cultural moment we're in? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next chapter. How did readers and critics receive Sunrise on the Reaping? We've explored the themes, the trauma, the horror, but here's the real test. How did the world react? Because a story isn't just what the author writes, it's what readers take away. And with Sunrise on the Reaping, the reaction has been nothing short of electric. Readers' echo, the fan explosion. The moment this book dropped, social media lit up. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, or X, depending on what you call it, were flooded with videos of readers crying, ranting, gasping. On Book Talk, hashtags like #Haymitch deserved better and #quarterquell trauma started trending within days. Clips of fans closing the book with shaking hands racked up millions of views. Some even filmed their live reactions to the final chapters, raw, messy, emotional. Why such intensity? Because this book rewired how people saw the series. Suddenly, moments in the original trilogy that readers skimmed past, Haymitch's drunkenness, his bitterness, his haunted silences, carried new weight. Fans felt like they'd misjudged him, and they loved Collins for making them feel guilty about it. What the critics said. Major outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian called the novel Collins' most haunting work yet. Several academic reviewers highlighted 3 points. Political sharpness. Critics praised Collins for weaving David Hume's philosophy into a YA narrative without making it feel like a lecture.
psychological realism. They pointed out how Haymitch's trauma is written with a level of depth rare in YA literature. Genre bending. Many labeled it YA horror dystopia, noting how Collins blurred categories to reach both teens and adults. Even skeptics who felt the original trilogy didn't need a prequel admitted this one added depth instead of milking nostalgia. Division among readers. But not everyone was on board. Some readers, especially those who expected a fast-paced adventure, found it too bleak, too heavy, even too depressing. This backlash, though, is part of what makes the book so impactful. A story that divides audiences is often the one that lasts. As one critic put it, Collins isn't here to comfort us, she's here to disturb us. And disturb she did. Cultural impact. What's fascinating is how quickly Sunrise on the Reaping jumped from book release to cultural conversation. In schools, some teachers are already debating whether to teach it alongside the original trilogy, especially for its themes of propaganda and consent. In pop culture, memes exploded from edits of Haymitch as a tragic anti-hero to side-by-sides comparing Panem's reality TV with modern media. In politics, a few commentators even drew parallels between Panem's control through spectacle and America's own obsession with celebrity culture and political theater. In other words, Collins didn't just publish a book, she sparked a debate. So what's the big picture? Why does Sunrise on the Reaping matter in 2024, almost 20 years after The Hunger Games first hit shelves? Because it reminds us that stories are never finished, that even side characters carry worlds of meaning. That trauma, power, propaganda, and horror aren't abstract ideas, they're lived realities, both in Panem and in America. It matters because it shows us that Suzanne Collins isn't just recycling an old franchise. She's evolving it, making it sharper, darker, more relevant than ever. And maybe most of all, it matters because it leaves us unsettled. Haymitch's story isn't a happy ending. It's a warning, a mirror, a challenge. So here's my question for you. Do you think Collins went too far with the darkness, or do you think this is exactly the book we needed right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'll be reading them all. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit like, share this video with a fellow Hunger Games fan, and subscribe for more book breakdowns like this one. Because this story, it's just the beginning of a bigger conversation, and I want you to be part of it.